The Courage to be Disliked by Kishimi and Koga. And so you've maybe heard things like the secret to living is giving, or you need to accept the things that you cannot control and take ownership of the things you can't control and have the kind of wisdom to know the difference. Well, both of those ideas come from a psychologist, Alfred Adler. Okay, and he's been very influential in modern psychology. And this book is basically a summary of his ideas. And the first time I heard about Adler was from, if you know over here, you know me, I'm a big reader. And one of my favorite authors, Dale Carnegie, he had a book, a chapter in one of his books titled How to Cure Depression in 14 Days, which I know is a really bold claim, but it came from Alfred Adler's work as a psychologist, and I thought it was really powerful, okay? And so I wanted to do a video breaking down this book with a chapter by chapter summary that will help you to understand and even apply Alfred Adler's theory of psychology. So let's get started. So let's begin this summary of really like the theory of Adlerian psychology, that of Alfred Adler. And this is based again on The Courage to be Disliked by Kishimi and Koga. So you'll find, kind of we'll go through this like big picture summary here, and then at the section by section and chapter by chapter level. So Adler is kind of like you know, Freud or Carl Jung are kind of like the famous, almost if you think like the founding fathers or like the Mount Rushmore we have, right? These are kind of like the faces of modern psychology, and the authors argue that Alfred Adler is kind of this third figure, and it's kind of called Adlerian psychology or individual psychology. It's really grounded in, I'd say, a focus on the individual's responsibility to make choices, interpret life events, and manage their own interpersonal relationships. And you'll see as we go through this that a lot of this has to do with kind of the constellation of your own perceptions, behaviors, and relating to other people comes together to form your lifestyle, which is really what dictates how happy and meaningful you find your life to be. There's a focus on something called life tasks, which again, we'll talk more about, but they're kind of like non-negotiable parts of your life that are yours to manage. And a really good way to remember this is kind of this, it's actually the serenity prayer from the Christian tradition, but like it's become so well known that it's kind of just popular culture. But you know, they say, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So a lot of this is really about acceptance, which we'll talk about later, then actually that courage or that ability or capacity to change certain things in your life. Much of your life is under your control, by the way. We'll talk about this. And then that wisdom to know the difference is what we talk about when you have certain life tasks, and you need to understand what is your life task versus what are the life tasks of other people that you actually need to step away from. What's also highlighted in this approach to psychology is to go beyond the need for like recognition or affirmation, and similarly, trying to avoid both praise or rebuke in your relationships. So you can think of these modes as almost like if you are giving out praise or your rebuke, which is kind of like to, you know, say, hey, that was bad, don't do that again. That's kind of a vertical partnership. There's sort of a hierarchy, like you are the person in charge of the situation with the power to sort of dole out a pat on the back or a slap on the wrist. There's actually an expression I love in the world of business that says, if you use carrots and sticks, you get donkeys. And Adler kind of echoes this, saying like, you can imagine if you were a married couple and your husband helps wash the dishes and you're like, hey, good job, great job, buddy, I'm so proud of you. It would kind of come across as not very affectionate or affirming, and kind of like almost disrespectful or childish. And so you're trying to not get into that mode of sort of passing judgments, right? Carrots and sticks of, oh, I'm going to give you a pat on the back because you did a really good job, or, oh, I'm going to kind of hit you with the stick on the wrist because you did badly. You want to be more horizontal. And so that's relating to the people in your life as your friends or your comrades, your kind of just partners. And so you can think about having more of the attitude of like, imagine your friend comes over to help you move out of your house because you're moving into a new apartment, right? You'd probably be like, oh, hey, thank you. That was awesome. Or imagine you have a friend who's trying to like interview for a new job and it's a job you know nothing about. You're not going to tell them what to do or say, hey, good job. You might just encourage them like, hey, good luck. You know, I know you have what it takes to do this. If there's anything I can do to support you, let me know. All right. So that's a slight shift in orientation. And we're trying to bring that attitude to all our relationships. Okay, life tasks, these big sort of ongoing areas of our life, ultimately occur in the present. So the past, including trauma, does not matter, according to Adler. The future is kind of out of reach, right? So what matters is living in the here and now and taking the best possible next step. This may require the courage to change. And the reason we say the courage to change is because often it's like fear of discomfort. Change is hard. Having to put yourself out there and potentially fail at something is hard. And so oftentimes it's actually a matter of courage to make the decisions required to change. And finally, as you go through this route, you'll find yourself wanting to contribute to others. And importantly, this is done without expectation or without kind of a need for validation. So it's not like you're people pleasing. It's more like you identify with a broader community, which we'll talk about what that means. But kind of the identifying with the broader world and the people around you and feeling like you want to contribute and serve others. And that, living in the present moment and having that sense of contribution is ultimately going to be the source of meaning, right? So it's not like we find the meaning of life, we bring the meaning to it. So you go through life dancing through each moment in the here and now, doing your best to contribute to others without expectations or validation, assuming the best in them. Take your responsibility for everything in life and do not turn away from your role in shaping your happiness through your way of life. This is the way of Adlerian psychology, okay? So you'll see that I have this broken up by night, which is kind of weird, but that is how this book is written, and it's kind of interesting. It's like a young, skeptical, kind of angsty college kid finds this Adlerian psychology philosopher guy, and over the course of 5 different nights, they have like these dialogues and discussions, and so it's written as though you're listening in on a kid, well, I guess a young man, talking to a psychologist, and in doing that, they like teach and communicate the ideas. So on the first night, the conversation is titled Deny Trauma. Okay, sort of a hot take in the title. We'll talk about that. The chapters are there. The unknown third giant, which is, like I said, the idea that Adler was kind of this unknown third giant in modern psychology. Why people can change. Trauma does not exist. People fabricate anger. How to live without being controlled by the past. Socrates and Adler. Are you okay just as you are? Happiness is something you choose for yourself. People always choose not to change. Your life is decided here and now. So I'll quickly hit on each of those chapters and then give like a big picture summary of this section, right? So we just talked about the third giant, why people can change, right? That kind of relates to the next one, if trauma does not exist. It essentially says, look, the past does not define the future. The past may inform the future, but we have all seen people who've had incredibly challenging lives and childhood upbringings that have turned out badly, but we've also seen people who've had incredible childhood traumas and challenges and turned out well. And so it's simply saying that people have the capacity to change no matter how tough your circumstances may seem. And importantly, while I, as kind of a nerd, and I do a lot of research into psychology and neuroscience, have to push back a little bit here, I believe trauma, in terms of the neuroscience, does exist. But practically speaking, we do not want the past to determine the future. People fabricate anger. In this chapter, he talks about how emotions are ultimately justifications to help one achieve a goal. And so if you, let's say, get really mad with your girlfriend because she showed up late, like the anger is something you're actually using to achieve your goal. And your goal, maybe you want to feel powerful. You want to feel in control of the relationship. You want to get her to meet your expectations about timeliness. Okay, so it's saying that it's not so much like, oh, I just got angry. It's saying that our emotions actually exist to serve our goals, which is kind of interesting. Then we get into how to live without being controlled by the past. This is what we'll talk about here a little bit more in the finer details. Socrates and Adler, so it kind of compares some of the origins of where Adler's thinking came from, how it relates to classical Greek philosophy, thinkers like Socrates. Are you okay just as you are? And unhappiness is something you choose for yourself, right? So again, those go back to the idea of how we see ourselves ultimately shapes our perceptions of happiness or unhappiness, and there are a lot of choices embedded in that. And then finally, people always choose not to change. Again, it's that message of empowerment I shared at the beginning that anyone can change. The past does not determine the future, and your life's decided in the here and now. And so really, Adlerian psychology, and we'll touch on this more as we go, is very much focused on right now, right this instant, what is the best possible thing you can do to improve your lifestyle? Because you have the capacity and the control to change right here, right now, not tomorrow. You can't change what happened yesterday, but you can change right now. And so again, just a few things that I'll highlight here. Remember what I said, that Adler literally says trauma does not exist. Okay, I respectfully disagree with that. There's pretty good neuroscience, and I'll link to it later in this resource, which is in the caption. But you can watch my video as well on The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. Certainly, we've come to understand in modern science that trauma does exist. But in practice, it just means that no experience in itself is the cause of good, bad, or anything else. It is about the meaning we give to it. And we often bend the meaning to suit our purposes. And what Adler is talking about here is, think of the example of maybe like your shut-in friend, right, who's super anxious and never leaves the house. Is it possible that he created his anxiety because he doesn't want to go out? Likely because this gets him a sense of easy superiority. Now, that sounds harsh, but think about this. So this is a shift that he talks about when he says the past does not matter, only your present goals. This is the shift from what's called etiology, which is causation focused, to teleology, which is purpose focused. That's down there. And what we're saying here is, you may think of it this way. The traditional cause focused etiology way is, my friend has anxiety and so he doesn't go out. The teleology, purpose-focused view would say, well, what is the present goal of your friend? And maybe his goal is he just doesn't want to be uncomfortable and he wants to get a sense of being like significant and different from everyone else. And so he creates or manufactures that anxiety actually as a justification for not going out. And by not going out and everyone thinking of him as a shut-in, it kind of makes him more significant in a sense, right? Because he's kind of like special, and people think like, oh, have you heard about John? Like he's, hasn't been out in a few days and he's struggling really bad. I wonder if there's anything we can do. So again, I know that sounds like harsh, right? But it's kind of just a different way of viewing things. Again, that's focused less on past experiences or things, and more on like, what are your present goals, and are your emotions and behaviors actually a way of justifying your goals, even if it's like a subconscious process. And so another example that may make this more clear is, imagine a writer who doesn't want to write, right? He keeps putting off his novel or his project because he, quote, doesn't have the time. That's because it's actually easier to live in a reality where you could possibly be a great writer, if only things were a little different, than to try and fail. And you can imagine 10 years from now, he'll be saying the same thing. Oh, I have a family to think about, so I can't become a writer. But again, thinking about the present goal, it may actually be easier and less uncomfortable to simply not do the writing, because you can still live in this made-up world of possibility of, oh, if only I had time, then I'd be a successful millionaire, famous writer. And so in a kind of a subconscious way, you're undermining yourself or not engaging in the behavior, because if you were to actually say, no, I need to just sit down and write tomorrow and I'm going to send it out to 50 of my friends, okay, that's a lot more uncomfortable, because you might find out that you actually suck at writing right now, which is pretty likely. And then you'd have to deal with that. And so that's kind of the big idea of this chapter here. And again, I touched on this, but emotions are not, quote, reactions in the usual sense. Again, they're manufactured to achieve a goal. And then finally, the lifestyle concept comes up here. Your lifestyle is a constellation of your behaviors, feeling, thoughts, and worldview. It is driven, of course, by genetics and circumstances, but in this moment, it is entirely up to you to accept and shape your lifestyle. And that's what we talk about here. Your life is decided in the here and now, and it's people choosing not to change, okay? So that's the big idea in the very first night in that dialogue there. Let's move on to the second night. It's going to get cut off a little bit. Sorry about that, but you'll see what all that says down there in a second. So I'll even move this up. The second night. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems, okay? So that is, again, another big idea here in Adlerian psychology, and I actually touch on this down here. It's like, if you were just alone on the planet, like, what psychological problems would you have? Sure, you may have a problem of I need to find food or water or shelter, but you wouldn't really have any like personality, relationshipy, emotionally type problems, right? And so that's what we're talking about there. When we think of all problems are interpersonal relationship problems, why you dislike yourself, that starts to get into the next couple chapters. Feelings of inferiority are subjective assumptions, and an inferiority complex is an excuse. As well as the next one, braggarts have feelings of inferiority. So think about this. We all have a desire to advance towards a more ideal state, and we all have occasional feelings of inferiority because we are not there yet. And Adler argues this is actually healthy. These are like stimulants for development, as long as the inferiority feeling doesn't become a complex which prevents you from effort or taking action. And so, again, the idea here is that we all have a desire to be better versions of ourselves and kind of advance ourselves and become more superior. And there are always going to be times where like, I kind of suck at this, or I wish my relationships were a little better. I'm going to do something about it. It becomes a complex if you get into this kind of idea of like apparent cause and effect. So instead of putting in the effort and courage, you kind of like use it an excuse not to do things. And the example they give in the book is, instead of putting the effort and courage into studying, one thinks, I am not well educated, so I cannot succeed. So what's happening there is that because you feel inferior, like, oh, I don't have a degree, or, oh, I'm not smart enough, you're actually using that as an excuse to not put the work into becoming more educated. And so it's kind of a self-fulfilling limiting belief. Often it's an excuse for, again, that lack of courage, because it's hard to get yourself to do this stuff and put yourself out there. And so he kind of argues that these feelings of when we dislike ourselves often arise from when we view life as kind of a competition with others. And so when we view life this way and we feel that we are inferior relative to other people's standards, which we shouldn't be even considering so much in the first place, then it can cause us to start to dislike ourselves. And then if it turns into a complex where it prevents us from actually improving in whatever area of life we're considering, then that creates kind of that cycle where we become even more self-defeating and quite negative. Okay, so moving on here, life is not a competition. You are the only one worrying about your appearance. From power struggle to revenge. Okay, so kind of what we see going on here is how we relate to others. And this, as we talked about there, right, when we view life as a competition with others, we grow discontent and disconnected. This can lead to bragging or narcissism actually as a coping mechanism. You'll recall the chapter up there, braggarts have feelings of inferiority. So you can imagine with someone, it's just easier to just act like you are a big deal, or say, oh, I'm so successful, or, oh, did you hear about this thing I did the other day? As opposed to just, again, putting in the work of developing maybe that healthy sense of superiority. Again, healthy sense of superiority, not being like you're better than everyone else, but just that you are actually doing the things to advance to a more ideal state or a more ideal expression of yourself. Then he talks about how we get into conflict with others. So if two people are in conflict, it's usually a mimetic cycle, and I actually will explain what that is if you go in and click on this video or on this resource and that link. But really, this is a cycle where you can imagine, like, I say something mean to you. What do? You say something mean back. Then I say something mean back. Then you yell back, and then I yell back, and then you shove me, and then I shove back, and then you hit me, and then I hit you. It's that cycle of kind of psychological reciprocation that is developed. There's a whole big theory on that I've written about, which you can find also on YouTube or in my notes here on the theory of mimesis from a guy named Rene Girard. And there's a book on it by Luke Burgis, Burgis. Okay, anyway, it becomes that kind of push-pull cycle of, right, self-fulfilling loop there, where even if you're just like arguing, it even might be that you're trying to get power over someone by provoking a reaction, right? You can imagine where you're trying to get the other person pissed off. And if you lose the argument, you may seek revenge indirectly. And so he talks about an example of this. You can imagine like a teenager who's trying to get power over the parents, and the parents kind of push back, and they get into these conflicts. And so the teenager, feeling like they want a power dynamic there, they want control over their parents, they don't have a healthy relationship with their parents, they just turn into a kind of a delinquent. They start, I don't know, using drugs or sneaking out or whatever. And it's a way of almost actually getting back at their parents, because you can imagine if your son, John Miller, gets arrested. I actually had a professor named John Miller, so that was a bad example. All right, this is not about Professor John Miller, but little Johnny Miller here, gets arrested, and his name's in the paper, and his parents are like, "Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing," and that's actually a kind of a weird interpersonal relationship way of getting revenge. So the best way is to just never get pulled into one of these struggles. If you feel you're getting into an argument, if you feel in one of your relationships, it's like you feel like you need to get back at them, or you're trying to get control over them, or they're trying to get control over you, is like, just don't participate in that thing. And we all know, you usually feel this when you feel a conversation, maybe it's about politics or beliefs, right? And it can kind of feel like it's going to turn into that conflict style of communication. It's just not participating, not getting pulled into that cycle, okay? The final, and then admitting fault is not defeat, right? So that's that idea of, in that moment, you can just say, oh, hey, I screwed up here, or hey, I'm really not sure, and it just, again, undermines that whole reaction instead of pulling into the conflict. Now, the final piece of this, overcoming the tasks that face you in life, red string and rigid chains, don't fall for the life lie, and then the psychology of possession to the psychology of practice. Okay, this is really concerned with the stuff down here, your life tasks. Oh, I skipped that to the third night. So your life tasks, right? These are the essential factors of your life, and they're really two objectives of all behavior. Okay, and I put this link down here. I have a video again on Dr. Gabor Mate. You can also go into my notes here and find it, because I found a common pattern there. There are really two objectives of all behavior according to Adler.
self-reliance, and harmony. So you have on one hand a desire to be sort of authentic and express yourself and be independent and autonomous and assert yourself, but then you have a desire for harmony and connection with others, and there's kind of a trade-off. Gabor Mate calls this authenticity versus attachment needs. And interestingly, I think there's also another connection here to evolutionary biology. Okay, so as human beings, we evolved with what's called intra-group competition and inter-group competition, which means we're competing as individuals against everyone else. Okay, that's self-reliance or authenticity, to assert yourself. We also evolved in groups of maybe up to 100, right? Like one group of primates and monkeys and hunter-gatherer cavemen and women competing against other groups of 100. That is that need for harmony, of attachment. And so what happens there, Jonathan Haidt's a psychologist who says we are part ape and part ant. And what he means, ant as an A-N-T, the bug. And what he means by that is that we are in some ways wired to be like individuals competing against all other individuals. But in other ways, we're meant to be this one of a community that competes against other communities. And so we're wired in some ways to want to be an individual, authentic self-expression, but then we're also wired to want to be in harmony and connected and a part of a whole. And so things can get kind of challenging there. But what this is all about here is understanding what your kind of life tasks are, okay, and finding a balance there and kind of thinking about these life tasks, right? They all relate to one of those two things: feeling connected and harmonious in a web of relationships, or being true to yourself, being authentic and independent. And so these life tasks are what I would call like the essential factors of your life, okay? So it may be like your relationships. That might be one set. Another might be your health. Okay, another set might be your work, and maybe one more if you, I don't know, have some creative personal hobby you're working on. But these are like the big buckets, and the life lie that you'll see referenced up there is when you become one-dimensional, or you sort of don't pay attention to one of these key areas. Any rationalization that will pull you away from one of your life tasks is a life lie. So really classic example of this that's actually touched on again later in the book is like the workaholic CEO who his family, like he's absent for them, he's not really around them so much, and he doesn't really spend super amount of time with his friends, and he hasn't really like put much time into his own mental or physical health, and he just works his ass off all the time to make a bunch of money. Okay, in that case, work may be a life lie because it's a justification for not participating or engaging in the other areas of life that are like essential for a healthy, happy, meaningful life. Okay, so again, the big idea there at the end: life tasks are the essential kind of things of your life that lead you to self-reliance and self-expression, or harmony and connection. And you want to understand what your task sets are, and then avoid rationalizations that prevent you from those, from kind of disengaging with the parts of your life. Okay? The third night. So here's where we take life tasks a step further. Discard other people's tasks. This is a very important chapter. So you have to deny the desire for recognition. Okay? Do not live to satisfy the expectations of others, and then how to separate tasks. So we'll get into that. So the first thing to keep in mind here is you're actually kind of thinking about that the desire for recognition. I personally think it's kind of part of human nature, but the authors here in Adler's theory suggest that we need to deny and not give into that desire to be recognized. And so the kind of next logical step with that is to separate out your life tasks versus those of others. So first of all here, there's an interesting thing of the role of recognition or praise and blame on the flip side. And I think this is summed up really well in this quote. Look right there. If no one is going to praise me, then I won't take appropriate action. And if no one is going to punish me, I will engage in inappropriate action. This is the danger of most of the social conditioning in our society. Remember I said earlier, use carrots and sticks, you get donkeys. We do not want vertical relationships, okay? Vertical relationships are concerned with the power to pass judgment. We want horizontal relationships without praise or blame. Okay, think of the word encouragement. The person still owns the task, but you do not praise or rebuke, but you may inspire. And so notice what we set up there about that idea of like, if I'm going to get praise or a reward, then I'll do the right thing. And if I'm going to get punished, then I'll do the right thing. It sort of like undermines your intrinsic motivation to engage with things. And so that's like the danger of the carrots and sticks approach. And so it's much better to not be concerned with the recognition or the benefit from others you're going to get, and just do things out of your own authentic motivation. And then again, on that related note, Remember, life tasks are determined by who will get the consequences. So you must separate your life tasks and own only your own. This is really important. So imagine parents worrying over like a child's schooling or a boyfriend obsessing over someone's like your girlfriend's passions or whatever. You're actually suffering a lot there because you have not separated life tasks. Remember that serenity prayer about what I can or can't control and the wisdom to know the difference? In the story they tell, or excuse me, in the book they tell the story of the Gordian knot, which is this story where Alexander the Great came to this big knot that was said to be like unable to be unraveled, and instead of unraveling it, he just cut it with his sword. So life tasks are saying, hey, what people do for their own life is not your life task. If people like you or not, that is not your life task. If people have a positive or negative emotional reaction to something going on around you, that is not your life task. No, those are their life tasks. So again, you may encourage them or support them in those things, but a lot of our suffering comes from us trying to control other people's life tasks, right? So you can imagine the anxiety, again, of a parent who, oh, I want my kid to get a 4.0 and make the football team and get into Harvard. Or, oh, I want my girlfriend to be obsessed with me and love me as much as I love her. Or, do these people like me? Or I'm going to work and I wonder if my boss thinks I'm really great or if my coworkers like me. All that like worrying is just not necessary. Those are their life tasks. You have your life tasks in each of those things, which may be to be a supportive and effective boyfriend, or to be a caring, supportive parent, or to do your craft and do your work very well to a high standard, right? But the part where it's other people's stuff is their life task, okay? Money is coin freedom. I kind of just threw that in there because I thought it was a good quote. So they highlight how money is useful because it can be a means to freedom and resources, but it is, of course, not everything. Okay, so by cutting that knot, like I said, separating people's life task from yours, that is going to be how you get rid of your relationship problems. Okay, and then finally, there's a tie to freedom here. Desire for recognition takes your freedom. Okay, so small typo there. So you see, like I said at the beginning here, if you only are doing things because you like are desiring that little reward at the end from other people saying good job, or you're scared that someone's going to yell at you if you do poorly, like that is not a recipe for lasting motivation or happiness. I was reminded of Joseph Campbell's quote down here. You must kill the dragon, thou shalt. Freedom is actually the courage to be disliked. And importantly, that doesn't mean you have a desire to be disliked, like you're just being a jerk. But it's really taking ownership of your relationships and your kind of equanimity, okay? Which is you are going to be content and grounded and confident, regardless of if people are heaping praise and throwing flowers at you, or whether or not they're rebuking you or saying, oh, you suck, or throwing tomatoes at you. If you can go beyond that need for validation and the kind of falling into other people's life tasks or letting people try to run your life, then you will have freedom. Okay, and so part of that, again, is the courage to be disliked, and may mean that other people are kind of upset with you or something. That's fine. You are taking ownership of your life. And finally, that last chapter, okay, you hold the cards to interpersonal relationships, is a reminder that ultimately navigating those relationships and how they affect your life and the role they have in your life, that is also up to you. The fourth night, where the center of the world is. Okay, whoops. Individual psychology and holism. Okay, so this is saying that the mind and body, reason and emotion, conscious and unconscious, these cannot be divided. One's life, or remember lifestyle, which is that constellation of behaviors, beliefs, perceptions, stories, and relationships, etc., must be viewed as a whole. And that's really what Adler's approach to individual psychology is all about. Now, these next couple, the goal of interpersonal relationships is a feeling of community. Now, what we all want, this is maybe the hardest to understand idea in the book, but I think it's valid. We all want a feeling of community, a feeling of it is okay to be here and belong here. But Adler views this in a more spiritual sense. We want to feel connected and at place within all that has ever been, all that is, and all that will be. Now, that's a little bit out there. So it's saying not only do I feel comfortable and connected and kind of like a part of everything right now, but also with the past, with the future, and not just here in my like house or here in my local community or even my country, like with the whole universe. And I think there's almost a contemplative or mysticism element here, that this may be viewed as kind of transcendent unity, or you think of like oneness in Eastern traditions, a feeling of oneness or attunement or resonance or engagement with the universe itself, with life itself. That is what he calls the community feeling. Why am I only interested in myself? Going back to the chapters, and you are not the center of the world. Listen to the voice of a larger community. Okay, so this is going into our own kind of perceptions and how we can actually shift our perspective to really be happier and more effective. What this is about here is, why am I only interested in myself? Ultimately comes from a mistaken perspective very often, that we think we are the center of the universe. But if you can make the switch to kind of concern for others, self-interest to social interest, that is the key to happiness. It's not what I can get, but what I can contribute. And it's like this cliche quote, but true. The truth is, the secret to living is giving. And so what I mean by shifting your perspective a little bit here is realizing that you are not even close to the center of the universe. Your life is kind of insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And it's identifying with that larger level. So they use the analogy of a storm in a teacup. You know, imagine it feels like you're inside a hurricane, this crazy storm. And if you just zoom out, it's like this little blip on the map. If you just adopt a broader perspective, it's really nothing. I mean, think of the turmoil of like the problem of being popular in high school, for example. Like it feels like it's just everything. But if you step out of that once you graduate and identify with a larger community or a larger perspective, you realize it's like totally insignificant. It's like a storm in that little teacup, and all of the stuff you thought was a big deal is actually not. And so being able to see your life from that kind of higher level, broader perspective is going to be a source of peace, happiness, and ultimately help you get in touch with that kind of community feeling, that spiritual harmony. Finally, do not rebuke or praise, the encouragement approach, and how to feel your value. So again, we talked about that horizontal and vertical idea, right? Of not wanting to be in horizontal or not wanting to be in vertical relationships where you're kind of doling out, hey, good job, or hey, you suck, but rather being kind of horizontal, kind of a partnership as an equal. And so instead of it's like, hey, do your homework or you're going to get in trouble, it might be, hey, how can I support you in doing your homework? And then they do is say, thank you for completing it. And so trying to encourage and inspire from that kind of parallel, equal relation rather than a hierarchical one. And as you do that, you'll find that we feel value through contribution to others. And now this is really important because remember what we said earlier about the courage to be disliked, the chapter of the book or the title of the book. We want this community feeling, okay? This feeling of connectedness with everyone else and everything else. And we get that through contribution, but we aren't doing it for praise or because we're scared of being punished. No, we're doing it free of expectation. We're assuming the best in others, and we're doing it not because we need a validation, but because that's human nature, is we want to contribute and serve something greater than us. And so it's not doing it for validation, not doing it with expectation that we'll get something back. It's just wanting to contribute to a world beyond you. That is where your value and meaning are going to come from, okay? And then finally, we'll touch on this more in the next section, exist in the present, and people cannot make proper use of self. Again, just talks about how we exist right here and right now, and that if it's just you in your own isolated little box, you're not going to get a lot of value or sense of meaning. So the last night, and I will share that last line there at the end. So to live in earnest in the here and now, this is the final section. Excessive self-consciousness stifles the self. Okay, that's kind of a self-explanatory chapter that when you're really self-confident, self-conscious, you get in the way. You trip over yourself and you can't express yourself in an authentic way. Not self-affirmation, self-acceptance. This is a really important chapter. Like, imagine you would get a 60% on a test and you say, oh, it's bad luck. I'm really 100%. I'm really a genius. This was just a fluke. The right thing would actually be to say, I got 60%. That is the reality of the situation. So how can I actually move towards getting 100 in the future? Self-affirmation in this model is kind of like lying to yourself and positive thinking of, oh, I'm actually great. You're so wonderful, Jackson, blah, blah, and it doesn't work too well. Self-acceptance, rather, is accepting who you are and what is true right now. And the extent to which you can accept yourself as a form of intrinsic worth, and it's not based on your acts, that is the extent to which you will be happy. So again, self-affirmation would be kind of just gassing yourself up. Oh, I'm so wonderful. Oh, I'm still the best. Self-acceptance, especially the kind we want here, is that you have intrinsic worth and value just for being. And it's not that that self-acceptance is contingent upon some actions or results, but it's just inherent. I accept myself. So you start with self-acceptance, right? And then you need confidence in others. So you view the world as for you, not against you. That's what we're talking about up there above, the difference between trust and confidence. So it's just saying that you have confidence in others, that people are not out to get you. And then you need contribution. The essence of work is a contribution to the common good. And thus you will get that community feeling that we referenced earlier. Okay, let's continue on here. Young people walk ahead of adults. Okay, that's just talking about generational shifts and how things show up at different seasons of life. Workaholism as a life lie, I already touched on that. Okay, that the person who's just working all the time and doesn't have time for any other areas of their life is kind of delusional or having a coping mechanism. You can be happy now. Two paths traversed by those wanting to be, quote, special beings and the courage to be normal. So that's one big idea here in the second paragraph towards the bottom. This is like a common challenge, right? You can actually just be happy right now, regardless of what's ever happening, if you make the choice to. But oftentimes, a trap we fall into is that we need significance and validation. And this can be a source of problem behaviors. I mean, think of like a teenager who shoots up a school or cuts their wrist. Why are they doing that? Well, they're getting attention and status. And so it's kind of these easy way out of how do I get to be special? How do I get to be significant and important and get a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, like a feeling of being valued and worthy and praised? Well, I'm going to kind of act out in order to get that. And obviously that is not a happy or healthy strategy to do so. And so it takes courage to be normal. Just having a life where you don't have that kind of, special person or you're significant and noteworthy. That's fine. Like, it takes courage to just live a pretty normal, good, happy life. Again, without that need for that extra kind of validation. That's what we're talking about here. So finally, going back up to the chapters, life is a series of moments. Live like you're dancing. Shine a light on the here and now. The greatest life lie and give meaning to a seemingly meaningless life. So often we think that life is kind of like you go from A to B. This would be thought of as a kinetic life. But what Adler talks about is an energial life. I use the term emergent, which means that it's not like, hey, I'm at point A, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer, just go to point B, okay, graduate high school, graduate college, go to med school, get the degree, get married, like do whatever. No, life is constantly almost emerging and kind of blossoming out like a big area of plants in the springtime. And so we can go through life almost more like a dance, right? Where the dance is kind of the process itself is the goal, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to try to dance my way from this side to the other side of the stage in the most efficient way possible. That would not be a dance. It'd be better to just run across the stage, right? The process itself, right? The life itself, it's not about where you're going, but it's about that experiencing the process of the becoming rather than just getting to the destination. Since the process of unfolding is in itself the point. It is more like a bloom than a step-by-step path. Okay? It is a connection of dots of present moments. Again, moment after moment after moment. Think about a trajectory more than like the end state, right? From here to there. It's more of like each moment, what is the trajectory that you're on? And you can imagine shining a bright light on the present. And as you do that, the past is kind of going to fall away. The future is kind of going to fade away. And so you want to live your life shining a light on the present moment, one step at a time. And that greatest life lie is anything that prevents you from living in the here and now. So importantly, if you need to step back for a second and like plan for the future or plan for, or, remember something that happened or reevaluate or make a business plan, like obviously that's fine. That may be what's called for in this moment. But constantly living like you're stuck in the past or living for the future, that is the biggest life lie. And finally, that last chapter, life is actually meaningless. We bring the meaning to it by experiencing each of these moments in the here and now and contributing to others to get that community feeling. So, like I said, to really summarize this, it's very much focused on individual empowerment. And I would say this kind of sums it up, right here, is that we want to go through life dancing through each moment, doing your best to contribute to others without expectations or need for validation, and assume the best in them. Take responsibility for everything in your life, and do not turn away from your role in shaping happiness through your way of life. Okay, this is the way, and this is what to expect out of Adlerian Psychology. and the courage to be disliked, okay? So thank you for watching. As always, like I said, down below this video, you can find like references and comments or resources, etc. I'll share a video as well right here that YouTube suggests you'll like. Thank you for watching. This is part of my mission to bring the art and science of happiness to the world as a whole. You can follow me, support however you want, and I will see you next time.